Welcome to Sleepy Dungeons. Tonight, we uncover the rise and fall of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the mythical wonders of the ancient world. In 600 BC, a civilization whose astonishing achievements and baffling mysteries still echo across time. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, have captivated imaginations for centuries, sparking awe and wonder about their construction, location, and the people behind them. What made this ancient city so powerful? What secrets does it hold? And why, after so many years, does it continue to fascinate us? Babylon, at its peak, stood as a shining beacon of ancient Mesopotamian civilization. It was a city of architectural marvels, a hub for learning, science, and culture, and a symbol of strength under the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar II. But amidst all its glory, there are questions that still remain unanswered, and some mysteries that may never be solved. As you listen, let the story guide you into calmness. May the rhythm of history soothe your thoughts, bringing you peace, rest, and the promise of good dreams. In this journey, we'll trace their beginnings, witness their triumphs, uncover the chilling reasons for their decline, explore unsolved mysteries that baffle historians, and reflect on the legacy they left behind. You've already followed this far, why not subscribe now? That way, you'll never miss another haunting journey into the forgotten corners of history. The land that would eventually become Babylon was shaped by the mighty rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates, 2 ancient forces of nature that nourished the soil and brought life to a region otherwise harsh and unforgiving. This land, known as Mesopotamia, which translates to between the rivers, was a cradle of civilization long before the rise of Babylon itself. For thousands of years, early settlers had made their homes along the banks of these rivers, relying on their waters for sustenance and transportation. Yet it wasn't until around 2000 BC, when the Akkadians began to settle here, that the foundations for what would later become Babylon were truly laid. The Fertile Crescent, as it came to be known, provided abundant resources that gave rise to the early settlements of Sumer, Akkad, and other city-states in the region. Each of these civilizations contributed to the cultural and technological advancements that would influence the future of Mesopotamia. The fertile soil from annual floods provided the basis for agriculture, which allowed these early settlers to thrive. They planted grains, vegetables, and dates, fostering the growth of thriving communities that spread across the landscape. It was within this context of early innovation that the foundations for Babylon's eventual rise were laid. The Babylonians, originally a small Semitic-speaking tribe, would find themselves in a region already home to advanced city-states, sophisticated writing systems, and flourishing trade networks. As they slowly gained influence in the region, Babylon would emerge as a strategic location, positioned at the crossroads of trade and culture between the north and south of Mesopotamia. The resources of the land, water, fertile soil, and proximity to vital trade routes, combined with a people eager to establish themselves in the complex world of Mesopotamian politics, gave them a strong foundation to grow. But it wasn't just the land that enabled Babylon's rise. The Babylonians were astute, learning from the civilizations that came before them. They adapted and improved upon the technologies and ideas that were developed by the Sumerians and Akkadians, particularly in the realms of mathematics, astronomy, and agriculture. This mix of favorable geography and the willingness to innovate would become a defining feature of Babylon as it grew in prominence. The conditions were now ripe for the rise of a new city-state, one that would leave a lasting legacy for millennia to come. But before Babylon could reach its full potential, it needed to endure the challenges of city building, political intrigue, and the continuous struggle for dominance in a world filled with rivals. It was from this environment that a powerful, ambitious civilization would emerge, one that would come to be known throughout the ancient world as a center of greatness. The origins of Babylon are steeped in myth and legend, woven into the fabric of its identity. As with many ancient civilizations, the Babylonians believed their city had divine origins, gifted to them by the gods themselves. The myth of Babylon's founding begins with the god Marduk, who is said to have risen to supremacy over the other gods. Marduk, a warrior deity and patron of Babylon, was revered as the creator of the universe. In the Babylonian creation epic, Enuma Elish, Marduk battles the chaotic forces of Tiamat, a primordial goddess of the salt waters, and brings order to the world. After his victory, Marduk was said to have created the heavens and the earth, as well as the first humans, using the blood of the slain Tiamat. It is in this divine context that the city of Babylon came into being. According to myth, Marduk chose the city as his earthly residence, making it the center of his kingdom. Babylon, as the seat of Marduk's power, was destined to be a place of strength and grandeur, where divine will and earthly affairs intersected. This belief in the city's sacred purpose helped to solidify its importance in the eyes of the Babylonians and those who encountered them. Archaeological evidence of Babylon's founding, however, tells a more complex story. The city was likely founded around 2300 BC, though it didn't rise to prominence until much later. Early evidence of Babylonian settlement shows that it was initially a modest village along the Euphrates River. Over time, this small settlement grew into a significant city-state, but its true rise began with the establishment of the first dynasty of Babylon under King Senwobum, who ruled around 1894 BC. Yet it wasn't until the reign of Hammurabi, nearly 4 centuries later, that Babylon's influence truly spread across Mesopotamia. In the centuries leading up to the time of Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon would go through various phases of growth and decline, with different rulers leaving their marks on the city. But through it all, the city retained its reputation as a place of cultural significance, with religious institutions at its heart. The ziggurat of Etemenanke, dedicated to Marduk, stood as one of the most impressive structures in the city, symbolizing both the city's devotion to its gods and its architectural prowess. The ziggurat's massive scale and the belief that it connected the heavens to the earth made it a powerful symbol of Babylon's divine status. The founding myths of Babylon were more than just stories, they were the foundation of the Babylonian identity. These myths forged a connection between the people and the gods, shaping their sense of purpose and unity. The gods were not just distant figures in the sky, they were present in every aspect of Babylonian life, guiding the rulers, the people, and the city itself. The divine protection of Marduk was believed to be the key to Babylon's prosperity, and as long as the people honored him, they believed their city would remain strong. These myths and beliefs would continue to play a significant role in Babylon's culture, guiding not only the actions of kings and priests but also the everyday lives of its citizens. The spiritual and political intertwined, creating a civilization that was as much about faith and tradition as it was about conquest and innovation. The foundation of Babylon, both mythical and historical, was built upon a deep belief in divine favor and the importance of honoring the gods who shaped their world. In the earliest days of Babylon's rise, survival was paramount. The fertile lands surrounding the Tigris and Euphrates provided ample resources, but the Babylonians needed more than just rich soil to thrive. They needed innovation and adaptation, and it was through these qualities that Babylon began to take shape as a powerful civilization. Agriculture was the cornerstone of their society, with crops such as barley, wheat, and dates providing sustenance for a growing population. But it wasn't just the natural environment that allowed the Babylonians to succeed, it was their ability to harness the power of irrigation. The Euphrates River, which flowed through the heart of Babylon, had the potential to flood its banks and destroy crops, but the Babylonians mastered the art of irrigation to control this mighty force. They constructed canals, dams, and dikes that not only allowed them to divert water to their fields but also ensured that the land would remain fertile year after year. This mastery of water management gave the Babylonians a strategic advantage over other civilizations in the region. Their ability to control the flow of water not only bolstered agricultural productivity but also allowed the city to grow as a trading hub, connecting various cultures and empires. In addition to agriculture, the Babylonians were pioneers in a variety of fields. One of their most significant innovations was the development of writing. The Babylonians adapted the cuneiform script, which had been invented by the Sumerians centuries before, and refined it to suit their needs. Writing became a tool for record-keeping, communication, and the preservation of knowledge. Cuneiform was used to document everything from agricultural yields to religious texts, making it an essential part of Babylonian life. Over time, this writing system would evolve and spread, influencing future civilizations and leaving a lasting legacy. Technology was also at the forefront of Babylonian innovation. The Babylonians were skilled craftsmen, known for their work in metal, pottery, and textiles. They constructed intricate pottery, some of which was decorated with geometric patterns or religious symbols, reflecting the importance of both functionality and artistry in their society. The use of bronze tools, weapons, and art objects also became widespread, showcasing their technological advancements. These innovations were not just for the elite, they were woven into the fabric of daily life. From the humble farmer to the skilled artisan, the innovations of the Babylonians touched every aspect of society. The social structure of Babylon was another key factor in its survival and eventual growth. At the top were the kings and priests, who were believed to be divinely chosen to rule and maintain order in the kingdom. The king was seen as the earthly representative of the gods, and it was his duty to ensure the prosperity of the land. Below the royalty were the scribes and merchants, whose roles were essential to the functioning of Babylon. Scribes were responsible for documenting everything from trade transactions to religious rituals, while merchants played a crucial role in the trade networks that connected Babylon to distant lands. At the bottom of the social ladder were the farmers and laborers, whose work provided the foundation for the city's wealth and stability. Through this intricate balance of agriculture, innovation, and social structure, Babylon survived and began to flourish. The city grew not only in size but in significance, attracting traders, scholars, and travelers from all corners of the ancient world. The Babylonians were building more than just a city, they were laying the groundwork for an empire that would come to be known for its culture, technology, and its breathtaking architectural feats. The survival and early innovations of Babylon were the bedrock upon which its greatness would be built, and they provided the foundation for the rise of one of the ancient world's most awe-inspiring civilizations. As Babylon continued to grow and develop, it was the leadership of strong rulers that would propel the city to new heights. One of the most famous figures in Babylonian history is King Hammurabi, whose reign marked a turning point in the city's fortunes. Hammurabi's rise to power was not by accident, it was a result of both his ambition and his ability to consolidate power in a region full of rival city-states. By the time he ascended the throne in the early 18th century BC, Babylon was already a prosperous city, but Hammurabi sought to make it the most powerful empire in Mesopotamia. Hammurabi's first major achievement was his military conquests. Through a series of wars, he expanded Babylon's borders, conquering neighboring city-states and bringing them under his control. These victories established Babylon as the dominant power in the region. However, Hammurabi was not just a warrior king, he also understood the importance of stability and law. In his quest to unify his empire, Hammurabi introduced one of the most important legal codes in history, the Code of Hammurabi. This set of laws, engraved on a stone stele and displayed for all to see, is one of the oldest and most complete legal systems ever discovered. The code covered everything from property rights to family law, and it was designed to ensure justice and maintain order within his empire. It established Hammurabi not just as a conqueror, but as a ruler who sought to govern with fairness and clarity. The Code of Hammurabi was just one example of how the king worked to solidify his power. He also established a centralized bureaucracy to manage the empire's day-to-day affairs. With a system of governors and officials, Babylon was able to maintain control over vast territories and oversee the distribution of resources. Hammurabi's reign saw the construction of monumental public works, including canals, temples, and the famous ziggurat at Enigmatic dedicated to the god Marduk. These projects not only helped to further cement Babylon's power but also left behind a lasting legacy of architectural achievement. Though Hammurabi was one of Babylon's most notable rulers, he was not the only leader to leave a significant mark on the city. After his death, Babylon would experience periods of both decline and resurgence, with various kings taking the throne and attempting to restore the empire's glory. However, it wasn't until the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II in the 6th century BC that Babylon truly reached the height of its power once again. Nebuchadnezzar, known for his military prowess and monumental building projects, was a ruler whose name became synonymous with Babylonian greatness. Nebuchadnezzar's military campaigns were just as impressive as those of his predecessor. He successfully defeated the Egyptian forces at the Battle of Carchemish, which solidified Babylon's control over the region. His reign also saw the conquest of Jerusalem, resulting in the famous Babylonian exile of the Jewish people. However, it was his architectural and cultural achievements that truly set him apart. Under his rule, Babylon became one of the most magnificent cities in the ancient world. He ordered the construction of the famed Ishtar Gate, with its blue-glazed bricks and images of animals and gods, as well as the massive ziggurat that is thought to have inspired the myth of the Tower of Babel. But perhaps the most famous of Nebuchadnezzar's accomplishments was the creation of the Hanging Gardens, a breathtaking feat of engineering that, according to legend, were built for his wife, Amytis, who longed for the green hills and mountains of her homeland. The Hanging Gardens, whether they existed in reality or were simply a product of myth, have come to symbolize the height of Babylonian achievement. They represented not just the power of Nebuchadnezzar as a king, but also the ingenuity and creativity of the people he ruled. Nebuchadnezzar's legacy is intertwined with the city he built, the empire he expanded, and the wonders he created. Under his leadership, Babylon became the envy of the ancient world, a city of culture, power, and architectural marvels. Babylon's influence began to stretch far beyond its walls, reaching across the vast plains of Mesopotamia and into the distant lands of neighboring civilizations. Under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar II and subsequent leaders, Babylon expanded its borders through a combination of military might, diplomacy, and strategic alliances. The Babylonians understood that in order to maintain their power, they needed to secure trade routes, protect vital resources, and keep rival empires at bay. As such, the empire's military campaigns were not only about conquest but also about establishing a network of influence that would allow Babylon to thrive for generations to come. The success of Babylon's expansion was largely due to its strategic position between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These waterways not only provided fertile land for agriculture but also served as vital arteries for trade. Babylon's location made it a crossroads between the East and West, connecting the great civilizations of Persia, India, and Anatolia with the Mediterranean world. This central position allowed Babylon to become a bustling hub for merchants, traders, and diplomats from all corners of the ancient world. One of the most significant diplomatic successes of the Babylonian Empire was the alliance with the Elamites, a powerful kingdom to the east. This alliance helped secure Babylon's eastern borders and allow for peaceful trade relations that enriched both civilizations. In the west, Babylon's control over the city-states of Syria and Palestine gave it access to important trade routes leading to Egypt and the Mediterranean. The conquest of Jerusalem in 586 BC and the subsequent exile of the Jewish people marked a key moment in Babylon's expansion. While this event is often remembered for its religious and cultural implications, it also underscored Babylon's growing power and dominance over the region. Babylon's influence wasn't confined to military conquests or territorial expansion alone. The empire's culture, art, and science began to seep into neighboring lands, leaving a lasting impact on the societies it encountered. Babylonian astronomy, for example, became a cornerstone of the ancient world's understanding of the cosmos. Babylonian scholars developed advanced methods of predicting the movements of planets and stars, laying the groundwork for future astronomical studies in Greece and beyond. The Babylonians also made significant contributions to mathematics, particularly in the field of geometry and the division of time into hours and minutes. Despite its military and cultural might, Babylon's expansion was not without its challenges. The empire's vastness and the diversity of its people meant that maintaining control over far-flung territories was no easy task. Rulers had to manage multiple cultures, languages, and traditions, and this often led to tensions between different regions of the empire. Even so, Babylon's ability to integrate these diverse cultures and manage such a vast empire was a testament to the leadership and ingenuity of its rulers. The architectural feats that accompanied Babylon's expansion were equally impressive. The construction of the Ishtar Gate, with its vibrant blue tiles and reliefs of animals, symbolized the city's power and wealth. The processional way leading to the gate was lined with statues of lions, adding to the grandeur of the city's entrance. Nebuchadnezzar's vision for the city included the construction of monumental buildings and the development of an urban infrastructure that supported both the elite and the common people. These developments helped to cement Babylon's status as the most impressive city in the ancient world, admired by all who visited. As Babylon expanded beyond its borders, it not only dominated the land but also influenced the cultures and civilizations around it. Its legacy, built on a foundation of military conquest, diplomacy, and cultural exchange, would resonate for centuries. Even after its eventual decline, the traces of Babylonian influence would continue to be felt across the ancient world, shaping the course of history. Babylon, during its height, became a beacon of prosperity and cultural achievement. Under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar II and other great leaders, the city transformed into a vibrant metropolis, a symbol of power, wealth, and intellectual achievement. The grandiosity of Babylon's architecture reflected the city's flourishing state, with monumental structures that not only served practical purposes but were also designed to awe and inspire all who visited. One of the most iconic elements of Babylon's prosperity was the construction of the magnificent ziggurat at Enigmatic, a towering structure dedicated to the god Marduk. This immense step temple, believed to be the inspiration for the biblical Tower of Babel, stood as a testament to the engineering prowess of the Babylonians. It reached a height of over 90 meters, dominating the skyline of the city. The ziggurat symbolized the connection between the heavens and the earth, a physical manifestation of Babylon's divine favor and its place as the center of the universe. It was not only a religious center but also a political and cultural one, where priests and rulers alike would gather to conduct the affairs of the empire. But the ziggurat was just one of many impressive structures that defined Babylon's skyline. The Ishtar Gate, another of Nebuchadnezzar's monumental projects, was adorned with stunning blue-glazed bricks depicting lions, dragons, and bulls. It was a gateway to the city, welcoming visitors and asserting Babylon's dominance over all who entered. The gate was not just a physical structure but a powerful symbol of Babylon's might and wealth. The processional way, a grand avenue that led up to the Ishtar Gate, was lined with statues of lions, further enhancing the city's awe-inspiring appearance. Inside the city, Babylon's markets were a hub of activity. Merchants from all over the ancient world came to trade in goods like textiles, spices, metals, and precious stones. Babylon's position at the crossroads of trade routes made it one of the wealthiest cities of its time. The bustling marketplaces were a reflection of the empire's economic prosperity, and they helped cement Babylon's role as a major trading power. This influx of wealth allowed the city to fund not only grand construction projects but also advancements in science, philosophy, and the arts. The Babylonian Empire was also a center of learning and intellectual growth. Scholars in the city made remarkable strides in fields such as astronomy, mathematics, and literature. Babylonian astronomers created some of the earliest star catalogs and developed a system of mathematics based on the number 60, which continues to influence how we measure time and angles today. Babylonian literature, too, flourished, with epic poems like the Epic of Gilgamesh becoming foundational texts in the history of world literature. These intellectual achievements were not limited to the elite, they were woven into the fabric of Babylonian society, with education and knowledge being valued at all levels of life. Religion played an integral role in Babylon's prosperity. The Babylonians believed that their success was directly tied to the favor of their gods, particularly Marduk, who was seen as the supreme deity. Temples dedicated to Marduk and other gods were scattered throughout the city, and religious festivals were central to Babylonian life. These festivals, which included elaborate processions and sacrifices, were not only expressions of faith but also public demonstrations of the wealth and power of the empire. The close connection between religion and politics ensured that the gods were always invoked in matters of governance, reinforcing the divine right of kings and the importance of maintaining harmony between the earthly and divine realms. Despite the overwhelming wealth and grandeur of Babylon, the prosperity of the empire was not without its challenges. The wealth that flowed into the city was unevenly distributed, with a large gap between the elite and the common people. This economic disparity, combined with the immense pressure placed on the workforce to maintain the empire's monumental projects, led to social tensions. The grand structures that defined Babylon were built on the backs of laborers, farmers, and slaves, who were often forced to work under harsh conditions. While the elites enjoyed a life of luxury and comfort, the majority of the population lived in relative poverty. Nevertheless, the age of prosperity in Babylon was a time of unparalleled achievement. The city became the most influential in the ancient world, attracting artists, philosophers, scientists, and scholars. The innovations and cultural advancements that flourished in Babylon would leave an indelible mark on the civilizations that followed, influencing everything from architecture to mathematics and literature. For a time, Babylon was a symbol of what a civilization could achieve when it was at the height of its power, wealth, and intellectual prowess. Babylon's society was one of complexity and contrast, where wealth and power were concentrated in the hands of the few, while the vast majority of the population lived in a much more humble existence. At the top of this social hierarchy sat the king, whose position was not only political but also religious. The king was seen as the earthly representative of the gods, responsible for maintaining order and ensuring the prosperity of the land. Nebuchadnezzar II, for example, was not only a military leader and conqueror but also a god-king whose authority was divinely sanctioned. His palace was the center of political life, but it was also a symbol of Babylon's grandeur, filled with treasures, artworks, and luxurious furnishings that reflected the wealth of the empire. Beneath the king were the priests, who held immense power within Babylonian society. Religion was the foundation of everyday life, and the priests were the intermediaries between the people and the gods. They were responsible for maintaining the temples, conducting rituals, and ensuring that the gods were properly honored. The most important temple was the ziggurat of Marduk, where the high priests performed sacred ceremonies to ensure the city's continued prosperity. These religious figures were not just spiritual leaders but political ones as well, as their influence extended into the governance of the empire. The priests were highly respected, and their position in society granted them privileges that few others enjoyed. Below the religious elite were the scribes, the intellectual backbone of Babylonian society. These individuals were responsible for recording the events of the day, from the king's military victories to the city's economic transactions. The invention and use of cuneiform writing enabled the Babylonians to document everything, and it was through the scribes' efforts that much of Babylon's history and culture were preserved. The scribes were highly educated and played an essential role in maintaining the bureaucratic systems that kept the empire running smoothly. Their work ensured that Babylon's legal and administrative systems functioned effectively, and their influence was far-reaching, extending into every facet of Babylonian life. Merchants also occupied a vital role in Babylonian society. As the city became a center of trade, the merchants were among the wealthiest and most influential people in Babylon. They dealt in goods from all over the ancient world, spices, metals, textiles, and precious stones, and their caravans traveled along the trade routes that connected Babylon to distant lands. The wealth generated by trade helped fuel the empire's economic prosperity, and merchants were often able to amass fortunes that rivaled those of the nobility. Their role in Babylonian society was indispensable, as they facilitated the flow of goods and resources that allowed the empire to thrive. However, the majority of the population in Babylon consisted of farmers, laborers, and slaves. These individuals worked tirelessly to support the empire's vast infrastructure, cultivating crops, building monumental structures, and providing the labor necessary for the city's daily functioning. While the elites enjoyed the luxuries of Babylon's prosperity, the common people lived under much harsher conditions. Many were bound by the demands of the state, working long hours for little pay. Despite the disparities in wealth and status, the labor force was vital to Babylon's success, as it was the backbone of the empire's economy. Family life in Babylon was centered around the home, where the father was the head of the household and the primary breadwinner. Women, while not holding positions of power, had important roles within the family and society. They managed the household, raised children, and participated in religious and cultural activities. Some women, particularly those in the upper classes, could attain a degree of influence through their association with powerful men or through their involvement in religious institutions. The most well-known example of this is the wife of Nebuchadnezzar II, Amytis, who is said to have inspired the construction of the Hanging Gardens. Her story reflects the complexities of gender roles in Babylonian society, where women could achieve greatness in their own right but were often restricted by the limitations of their social position. Cultural life in Babylon was rich and diverse, with art, music, and literature playing significant roles in everyday life. The Babylonians were skilled artisans, creating beautiful jewelry, pottery, and textiles that were highly prized throughout the ancient world. Their music, while not as well documented as their other arts, was an important part of religious ceremonies and festivals. The Babylonians also celebrated a variety of festivals throughout the year, which were dedicated to the gods and marked the changing of the seasons. These festivals were filled with music, dance, and feasting, and they served to reinforce the bonds between the people and their gods. Despite the wealth and cultural achievements, Babylonian society was not without its flaws. The vast inequalities in wealth and power led to social tensions, and the oppression of the lower classes was a constant undercurrent in the empire. The grandeur of the temples and palaces stood in stark contrast to the squalor of the poorer districts, where laborers and slaves lived in harsh conditions. The disparity between the ruling elite and the common people created an environment where discontent was always lurking just beneath the surface. The wealth of Babylon was also tied to its ability to maintain control over its vast territories. The military, with its powerful army and skilled commanders, played a crucial role in keeping the empire intact. But as Babylon expanded, the burden of maintaining such a large empire grew heavier. The resources of the empire were stretched thin, and the heavy demands placed on the common people began to create unrest. As Babylon's power reached its peak, cracks began to form in the foundations of its society, setting the stage for the challenges that would eventually lead to its decline. Despite Babylon's great wealth, power, and cultural achievements, beneath the surface, cracks began to form in the empire's foundations. These cracks, small at first, slowly widened over time, driven by internal strife, economic inequality, and political instability. The very prosperity that had brought Babylon to its height also sowed the seeds of its decline. The disparities between the elites and the common people were striking. While the king and the priests lived in opulence, the majority of Babylon's population, including farmers, laborers, and slaves, struggled to make ends meet. The grandeur of Babylon's monumental structures, such as the Ishtar Gate and the Hanging Gardens, was a reminder of the empire's wealth, but it was also a symbol of the growing gap between the ruling class and the everyday people. The burdens of maintaining such a vast empire began to take their toll. The construction of monumental projects, while a testament to Babylon's power, required immense resources and labor. Much of this labor was provided by the lower classes, who were often overworked and underpaid. The grand building projects, including the construction of temples, palaces, and city walls, required a constant supply of workers, many of whom were forced into servitude or slavery. These conditions fostered resentment and unrest among the common people, who began to question the legitimacy of the ruling elite. The lavish lifestyles of the wealthy and the suffering of the laborers created an atmosphere of growing discontent. Economic inequality further exacerbated the tensions within Babylonian society. While merchants and elites grew increasingly wealthy, the majority of the population lived in poverty. Farmers were at the mercy of the state, their livelihoods dependent on the whims of the rulers and the demands of the empire. Despite their hard work, many farmers struggled to pay their taxes, which were used to fund the lavish lifestyles of the elite and the continuous construction of Babylon's monumental structures. The wealthy lived in palatial homes, adorned with jewels and fine furnishings, while the poor lived in crowded, unsanitary conditions. The disparity between the rich and the poor created a social divide that became increasingly difficult to bridge. At the same time, political instability began to take root in Babylon. While kings like Nebuchadnezzar II had brought glory and power to the empire, subsequent rulers struggled to maintain the same level of control. The vastness of the empire made it difficult to govern effectively, and regional governors often acted with autonomy, answering only to the king in name. As the central authority weakened, local factions began to grow in power, and rivalries between different regions of the empire grew more pronounced. This fragmentation of power made it increasingly difficult for the Babylonian rulers to maintain control over their vast territories, and internal divisions began to erode the unity of the empire. In addition to these social and political challenges, Babylon was also dealing with the pressures of foreign invasion. While the Babylonians had long been able to fend off external threats, the rise of powerful neighboring empires like Persia and the Medes put Babylon's security at risk. The once imposing Babylonian military, which had once expanded the empire's borders and ensured its dominance, was now facing increasing difficulties in defending its vast territories. The empire's military campaigns, once characterized by swift victories, began to falter, and the Babylonians found themselves stretched thin, unable to effectively defend their borders from invading forces. Religious tensions also began to play a role in the empire's decline. The Babylonian religion, centered around the worship of Marduk, had long been a unifying force for the people. However, as the empire expanded, it incorporated a variety of different cultures and religious practices. While this cultural diversity was one of Babylon's strengths, it also created friction between different religious groups. The rise of new religions and the spread of foreign ideas threatened the dominance of the Babylonian gods and their priesthood. The Babylonians found themselves struggling to maintain their religious authority in the face of growing religious diversity, and this internal conflict weakened the spiritual cohesion that had once held the empire together. As these internal and external pressures mounted, Babylon began to show signs of weakness. The once mighty empire that had ruled over much of the ancient world was now facing the challenges of political instability, economic inequality, and external threats. The cracks within the empire had begun to widen, and the once thriving city of Babylon was on the brink of a significant transformation. The prosperity that had defined Babylon for so long was no longer enough to sustain the empire, and the forces of decay were beginning to take hold. It was only a matter of time before these cracks would lead to the empire's downfall. As Babylon's internal struggles deepened, it also faced an increasing array of external challenges. For centuries, Babylon had been the dominant power in the ancient Near East, but as its influence began to wane, rival empires began to rise, each posing a threat to Babylon's security and territorial integrity. The once unassailable Babylonian military, which had expanded the empire's borders to their furthest reaches, now found itself fighting to defend its own territory. The Babylonians were no longer the invincible force they once were, and their military struggles reflected the growing instability within the empire. The first major threat came from the Medes, a people from the north who had gradually been expanding their own power. The Medes had once been a subordinate group within the Babylonian sphere of influence, but under their leader, Cyaxares, they began to challenge Babylon's dominance. The Medes had a powerful and disciplined army, and their forces began to push into Babylonian territory. While the Babylonians initially held their ground, the Medes, aided by the growing power of the Persian Empire to the east, began to mount a coordinated effort to break Babylon's hold over the region. At the same time, the Persians themselves were rising in strength. Under the leadership of Cyrus the Great, the Persian Empire had expanded rapidly, swallowing up neighboring kingdoms and city-states. Babylon, once a powerful empire, now found itself caught between the Medes to the north and the Persians to the east. As the Persians and Medes united under Cyrus's rule, the combined forces of the two empires posed an existential threat to Babylon. The Persian invasion was not a sudden event, it had been building for years, as Cyrus carefully strengthened his position and forged alliances with Babylon's enemies. In 539 BC, after years of mounting pressure from both internal unrest and external foes, Babylon fell to the Persians. The Persian army, having already conquered the territories around Babylon, now turned their attention to the city itself. The fall of Babylon was swift, but it was also marked by an element of surprise. The city, though still formidable, had become complacent in its arrogance, believing that its walls were invincible and that its reputation would protect it. But when Cyrus and his forces diverted the Euphrates River, they were able to march directly into the heart of Babylon, bypassing the city's defenses. The conquest of Babylon marked the end of an era. The once mighty empire, which had been the center of culture, trade, and military power, was now a shadow of its former self. The Babylonians, though they had resisted outside invaders for centuries, were ultimately unable to withstand the combined might of the Persians and the Medes. The city itself, once a symbol of Babylonian greatness, was now a conquered prize in the hands of a new empire. But even as Babylon fell, it did not disappear completely from history. The Babylonians had left an indelible mark on the world. Their achievements in architecture, astronomy, and mathematics would continue to influence the civilizations that followed. The Persian Empire, which had conquered Babylon, would inherit much of Babylon's culture and knowledge. Persian kings would adopt Babylonian religious practices and architectural styles, ensuring that Babylon's legacy lived on long after its political power had crumbled. Despite its fall, Babylon remained a symbol of both greatness and decline, a civilization that had risen to the heights of power and influence but ultimately could not withstand the pressures of time, both from within and without. The external challenges faced by Babylon, from rival empires to invasions, reflected the vulnerability of even the most powerful civilizations. The rise and fall of Babylon was not just a story of military conquest but also a reminder of the fragility of empire and the ever-present forces that can disrupt the most seemingly invincible of civilizations. The turning point in Babylon's history was not marked by a single battle or event, but rather by a series of failures that culminated in its eventual downfall. These critical moments, when key decisions were made and opportunities missed, shaped the fate of the great city. The once mighty empire had been stretched thin by its own grandeur, and the leadership of Babylon, once a force of unifying strength, had begun to falter. One of the earliest signs of Babylon's decline was the failure to adapt to the changing geopolitical landscape. As rival empires like the Persians and the Medes rose in power, Babylon failed to adjust its strategies and fortify its defenses. Despite its impressive walls and military might, the city's rulers had grown complacent, believing that their strength and reputation would be enough to protect them from external threats. But this overconfidence proved to be their undoing. Internally, Babylon faced significant challenges as well. The empire's vast wealth had created deep divisions between the ruling elite and the lower classes, whose labor sustained the empire. The rich grew richer, while the common people struggled under heavy taxes and harsh working conditions. This inequality bred resentment and unrest, and it was only a matter of time before the social tensions boiled over. The Babylonians had once been united by their shared culture and faith, but as the empire grew larger and more diverse, cracks began to form in their unity. The internal divisions weakened the empire's ability to resist external threats, and by the time Babylon was faced with the Persian invasion, it was already a shadow of its former self. Perhaps the most significant turning point came with the leadership, or lack thereof, during the final years of Babylon's reign. While the earlier kings, like Nebuchadnezzar II, had been strong, visionary leaders, the kings who followed him were less capable. The lack of effective leadership during this critical period allowed for corruption, mismanagement, and political fragmentation within the empire. The once centralized bureaucracy that had held Babylon together began to crumble as regional governors gained more power and autonomy. The failure to maintain a strong, unified front left the empire vulnerable to invasion and internal collapse. The turning point was also marked by Babylon's underestimation of the Persian threat. The Babylonians had faced countless enemies over the centuries and had grown accustomed to their dominance in the region. However, the Persians, led by Cyrus the Great, proved to be a more formidable adversary than the Babylonians had anticipated. Cyrus was a brilliant strategist who understood the importance of both military strength and diplomacy. He united the Medes and Persians into a single, powerful force and used both military conquest and political alliances to expand his empire. His invasion of Babylon was methodical and well-planned, catching the Babylonians off guard. By the time the Persians marched on Babylon, the city's defenses had been weakened by years of neglect and internal strife. The Babylonians, once proud of their mighty walls, found that their fortifications were no match for the determined Persian forces. The diversion of the Euphrates River, which allowed Cyrus's army to march directly into the heart of the city, was a brilliant tactical move that bypassed the city's defenses and led to a swift and unexpected conquest. This final failure to defend the city marked the true turning point in Babylon's history. The empire, which had once ruled over much of the ancient world, was now at the mercy of a new power. Babylon had fallen, not because of a single catastrophic event, but because of a series of critical failures, both internal and external, that had left the city vulnerable. The turning point came when the once proud empire could no longer overcome the weight of its internal divisions, external enemies, and ineffective leadership. The fall of Babylon was as swift as it was dramatic. Once a city that had stood as the pinnacle of power, wealth, and cultural achievement, it crumbled before the might of the Persian Empire, leaving behind only the remnants of its former glory. The end of Babylon's reign did not come with a loud clash of battle, but rather with a quiet and calculated invasion that caught the city unprepared. Cyrus the Great, the Persian king, had carefully planned the conquest of Babylon, exploiting the empire's internal weaknesses and its overconfidence in its defenses. When the Persian forces arrived at Babylon in 539 BC, they were met with little resistance. The Babylonians had grown complacent, believing that their mighty walls and the city's strategic position would protect them from any invader. They had been the dominant force in the region for centuries, and their military might have become legendary. But Cyrus, using a combination of military strategy and diplomacy, was able to infiltrate the city without firing a single shot. The Persians diverted the Euphrates River, which flowed through the city, and marched their troops into Babylon along the dry riverbed, bypassing the city's massive walls. This tactical maneuver rendered Babylon's defenses useless, and the Persian forces swiftly took control of the city. The fall of Babylon was not marked by a violent siege or a great battle. Instead, it came through a quiet, almost peaceful occupation. The Babylonians, disillusioned and divided, offered little resistance to the invaders. The city's once mighty defenders were no match for the disciplined Persian army, and the city surrendered without much of a struggle. For all of Babylon's greatness, it fell not in a blaze of glory, but in a whimper, overwhelmed by a force it had underestimated. In the aftermath of the Persian conquest, Babylon was incorporated into the Persian Empire, and its former grandeur faded into history. The city's magnificent structures, including the Hanging Gardens, the Ishtar Gate, and the Ziggurat of Marduk, were left behind, slowly decaying as the Persian Empire imposed its own culture and systems upon the region. The Babylonians, once rulers of the ancient world, were now subjects of a new empire. The city that had been the envy of all who gazed upon it had been reduced to a mere provincial capital in the vast Persian domain. The fall of Babylon marked the end of an era. The city had once stood as a beacon of culture, power, and innovation, but it had been undone by its own internal divisions, its overconfidence, and the rise of new powers. Babylon's collapse was a stark reminder of the fragility of even the greatest empires. No matter how powerful a civilization may be, there are always forces, both internal and external, that can bring it to its knees. The fall of Babylon was not just the loss of a city, but the loss of an entire way of life, a way of thinking, and a unique culture that had once shaped the ancient world. While Babylon's political power had come to an end, its legacy endured. The influence of Babylonian culture, art, science, and architecture continued to reverberate through the ages. The knowledge and innovations of the Babylonians, from their advancements in astronomy and mathematics to their stunning architectural achievements, would continue to inspire future generations. Babylon may have fallen, but its story would never be forgotten, for it had left an indelible mark on the world. Even after the fall of Babylon, the mysteries surrounding the city only deepened. Among the most famous of these mysteries is the question of the Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. These legendary gardens, said to have been built by Nebuchadnezzar II for his wife, Tiz, have captivated historians, archaeologists, and dreamers for centuries. Descriptions of the gardens speak of lush, terraced greenery suspended high above the city, watered by an ingenious irrigation system that defied the very landscape of Mesopotamia. According to ancient writers, the gardens were a breathtaking sight, an oasis of flora in the heart of the dry, arid desert, a feat of engineering that seemed almost magical in its execution. But despite the many references to the Hanging Gardens in ancient texts, no definitive evidence has ever been found to confirm their existence. Some scholars believe that the gardens were a real, tangible marvel, constructed with advanced irrigation techniques to bring life to the arid city. Others argue that they might be nothing more than a myth, a dream of ancient writers who sought to amplify the glory of Babylon. The lack of concrete archaeological evidence has left the Hanging Gardens shrouded in mystery. Some even speculate that the gardens could have been located elsewhere, such as in Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, where similar descriptions were recorded. The true location and existence of the gardens remain one of the most intriguing unsolved mysteries of the ancient world. Another mystery surrounding Babylon is the fate of its monumental structures. While the Ishtar Gate and the Ziggurat of Marduk were once among the most impressive feats of ancient architecture, much of Babylon's grandeur has been lost to time. The ruins of the city, though still remarkable, have been ravaged by centuries of neglect, natural disasters, and the passing of empires. What remains of the Hanging Gardens, if they ever existed, is buried beneath the earth, and the great temples and palaces have crumbled into dust. Archaeologists have uncovered portions of the Ishtar Gate, but much of Babylon's once glorious cityscape remains elusive. It is as though the very spirit of the city has vanished, leaving behind only fragments and relics. The writings of ancient historians and travelers offer tantalizing glimpses of Babylon's splendor, but they too are often contradictory and unreliable. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, mentioned Babylon's gardens in his accounts, but he provided little in the way of specifics. Other writers, like Strabo and Diodorus, describe the city in glowing terms, yet their accounts seem to vary wildly on the details. These inconsistencies have led some historians to question whether Babylon's grandeur was exaggerated, and if so, to what extent. Were the descriptions of the city's magnificence merely the embellishments of outsiders seeking to capture its glory, or was Babylon truly as awe-inspiring as ancient texts suggest? The most enduring mystery of all, however, is the fate of the city itself. After the Persian conquest, Babylon's influence faded, and the city slowly sank into obscurity. Once a thriving metropolis, it became a ghost town, its population scattered and its structures left to decay. The ruins of Babylon were eventually abandoned, and by the time Alexander the Great passed through the city in 331 BC, it had already lost much of its former grandeur. Over the centuries, the ruins were further plundered for their building materials, and the city's location was eventually forgotten. It wasn't until modern archaeology revived interest in the site that scholars began to piece together the remnants of Babylon's once impressive cityscape. Yet, even today, much of the city remains buried, and many questions about its true nature remain unanswered. The mysteries of Babylon are not limited to its architecture and gardens, they extend to its people, its rulers, and its culture. What made Babylon such a powerful empire in its prime? What drove its rulers to create such extraordinary monuments? And why did such a mighty civilization fall so swiftly? These questions continue to haunt historians, who are left with only fragments of evidence and a series of tantalizing clues. In many ways, the mysteries of Babylon are as important as its achievements. The unanswered questions keep the story of Babylon alive, sparking curiosity and inspiring further exploration. The city's legacy is built not just on the monuments it left behind but on the mysteries that continue to captivate the imagination. Babylon, with all its splendor and secrets, remains a symbol of human ambition, creativity, and the enduring desire to uncover the past. Though Babylon fell to the Persians and its once mighty empire crumbled, its influence continued to reverberate through the ages. Babylon's legacy was not confined to the walls of its city or the limits of its empire. It became a touchstone for later civilizations, shaping everything from art and architecture to science and philosophy. The ideas, innovations, and cultural achievements of the Babylonians would be carried forward by the empires that followed, ensuring that the spirit of Babylon lived on long after its fall. The most enduring aspect of Babylon's legacy was its contribution to science and mathematics. Babylonian astronomers, who had long studied the stars and mapped the heavens, laid the groundwork for much of Western astronomy. They were among the first to develop a system of timekeeping based on the lunar cycle, dividing the day into 24 hours and the hour into 60 minutes, a system still in use today. Their meticulous observations of celestial bodies and their ability to predict eclipses and planetary movements were groundbreaking. Even the ancient Greeks, whose own astronomical advancements are often celebrated, were indebted to the Babylonians for their knowledge. The Babylonians also contributed significantly to mathematics, with their use of a base 60 number system that influenced later mathematical developments in both the East and the West. In addition to their scientific achievements, the Babylonians left an indelible mark on architecture. Their grand monuments, such as the Ishtar Gate and the Ziggurat of Marduk, were masterpieces of engineering and design that set the standard for monumental architecture in the ancient world. These structures influenced the design of later temples and palaces, particularly in Persia, where the ruins of Babylon served as inspiration for the construction of Persepolis. The grandeur of Babylon's buildings was not just a reflection of its wealth but a testament to the ingenuity and creativity of its people. The Babylonians understood the power of architecture to project power and authority, and their designs influenced the cities and structures that would follow. Babylon's cultural influence also extended beyond the realm of science and architecture. The city was a center of learning and scholarship, and its libraries housed vast collections of texts on a wide range of subjects, from religion and mythology to history and law. The most famous of these texts was the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known works of literature. This epic, which tells the story of a king's quest for immortality, has been passed down through the ages and remains a cornerstone of world literature. The Babylonians' contributions to literature, particularly their development of written language, were profound. The cuneiform script, which the Babylonians inherited from the Sumerians, became a tool for documenting history, recording laws, and preserving religious texts. This system of writing would be adopted and adapted by other civilizations, spreading throughout the ancient Near East and beyond. The influence of Babylon also extended to religion. The Babylonians worshipped a pantheon of gods, with Marduk at the head, and their religious practices would leave a lasting mark on the cultures that followed. The Persians, who conquered Babylon, adopted many aspects of Babylonian religion, including the worship of Marduk, and incorporated them into their own religious system. Even the ancient Hebrews, who were exiled to Babylon during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II, were influenced by Babylonian religious and cultural practices. The stories of the Hebrew Bible, particularly the Book of Daniel, reflect the cultural exchange that occurred during this period, with Babylonian traditions blending with Hebrew thought. Despite its fall, the spirit of Babylon continued to live on in the civilizations that succeeded it. The Roman Empire, which came to dominate much of the ancient world, was heavily influenced by Babylonian culture, particularly in its adoption of architectural styles and legal systems. The Romans, like the Babylonians, understood the importance of grand architecture in projecting imperial power, and they looked to Babylon's monuments for inspiration. Even in the modern world, the legacy of Babylon can be seen in everything from the design of modern cities to the way we measure time. Babylon's impact on later civilizations is undeniable. The city that once stood as the greatest empire in the ancient world may have fallen, but its influence persisted, shaping the course of history for centuries. Its contributions to science, architecture, literature, and religion laid the foundation for the civilizations that followed, and its cultural achievements continue to inspire and fascinate us to this day. The fall of Babylon may have marked the end of an empire, but it did not mark the end of its legacy. The story of Babylon is a tale of extraordinary rise and equally extraordinary fall, a civilization that achieved remarkable feats but ultimately succumbed to the forces that even the greatest empires cannot control. Babylon's struggles, both internal and external, offer valuable lessons that transcend time and culture, providing insights into the vulnerabilities that every civilization, no matter how powerful, faces. One of the most poignant lessons from Babylon's decline is the fragility of power. At its height, Babylon was an awe-inspiring empire, celebrated for its wealth, military might, and cultural achievements. Yet, despite its grandeur, it was ultimately undone by the same forces that all great empires must reckon with: internal divisions, overextension, and external pressures. The very strength that had once made Babylon a dominant force in the ancient world, its military, its wealth, and its infrastructure, was no match for the combination of complacency, ineffective leadership, and a failure to adapt to changing circumstances. Babylon's leaders, especially in the latter years, failed to recognize the need for reforms or to anticipate the growing threats from neighboring empires. This sense of invincibility, born from centuries of success, proved to be its undoing. The second lesson is the impact of internal strife. Babylon's political and social instability played a significant role in its downfall. The widening gap between the ruling elite and the common people created an undercurrent of resentment that ultimately weakened the unity of the empire. The grandeur of the city's architecture and the wealth of its leaders were contrasted by the hardships of the common laborers who were forced to build and maintain these structures. The economic disparity and the oppression of the lower classes bred discontent, and this social tension made the empire more vulnerable to external threats. Babylon's internal divisions, whether in the form of class struggles, political fragmentation, or ineffective leadership, sapped its strength from within. In the end, it was not just external forces that brought Babylon to its knees but also its inability to maintain internal cohesion. Another critical lesson is the danger of overextension. Babylon's military campaigns, once a source of pride, ultimately led to the empire being stretched too thin. As Babylon expanded its borders, it took on more territories, more people, and more resources than it could adequately manage. The military, once the empire's backbone, began to falter as it struggled to defend such vast borders. The city's military might, combined with its wealth and engineering prowess, had been enough to secure its dominance for centuries. However, the sheer size of the empire, coupled with the demands of maintaining so many territories, weakened Babylon's ability to defend itself when the Persian threat became imminent. Overextension is a common theme throughout history. When empires expand too quickly or try to maintain control over too much territory, they risk spreading their resources too thin and facing collapse from within. Additionally, Babylon's failure to adapt to new realities in the face of rising powers is a significant lesson. The Persian Empire, under Cyrus the Great, proved to be a more flexible and innovative force, combining military power with diplomatic strategy. While Babylon relied heavily on its traditional military tactics and defensive structures, the Persians recognized the importance of alliances and used clever strategies to bypass Babylon's defenses. The diversion of the Euphrates River, which allowed the Persians to march directly into the heart of the city, is a brilliant example of how adaptability and strategic thinking can overcome seemingly invincible defenses. Babylon's failure to recognize and adapt to these new tactics left it vulnerable to an empire that was willing to think outside the box and leverage both military and diplomatic methods. The final lesson from Babylon's struggles is the idea that even the greatest civilizations are subject to the inevitable forces of time. The rise and fall of empires is a constant cycle in human history, and Babylon is a prime example of how even the most impressive achievements cannot ensure eternal dominance. As time marches on, new powers rise, new ideas emerge, and old civilizations fade into memory. Babylon's fall is a reminder that nothing is permanent, no empire too powerful, no culture too entrenched. The greatest empires will eventually give way to new forces, just as Babylon did when the Persians swept in. Yet, while Babylon's political power and military might may have dissolved, its cultural and intellectual legacy lives on. The Babylonians left behind a profound influence on science, mathematics, architecture, literature, and religion, contributions that would shape future civilizations and continue to impact the world long after the city's fall. Babylon's legacy is proof that while empires may rise and fall, the ideas, innovations, and wisdom they leave behind can endure for millennia. In the end, the lessons from Babylon's struggles remind us of the impermanence of power, the importance of internal unity, the dangers of overextension, and the need for adaptability in the face of new challenges. Babylon's story is both a cautionary tale and a testament to the enduring power of human achievement. As we come to the end of our journey through the rise and fall of Babylon, we are left with a story that has captivated minds for centuries. The city that once stood as a symbol of power, culture, and architectural brilliance now lies in ruins, its mighty walls and magnificent structures buried beneath the sands of time. Yet, the spirit of Babylon endures, its legacy living on through the countless contributions it made to science, mathematics, literature, and architecture. The Hanging Gardens, one of the most enduring symbols of Babylonian grandeur, remain a mystery, their true existence still debated by historians and archaeologists. But the legend of these gardens, like so many aspects of Babylon, continues to inspire awe and wonder. The city's story serves as a reminder of both the fragility and the strength of human civilization, a civilization that, though it fell, left behind a legacy that shaped the course of history. What do you think about the mysteries of Babylon? Did the Hanging Gardens ever truly exist, or were they merely a legend? What other secrets might still lie buried beneath the ancient city? Share your thoughts and ideas in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the rise and fall of Babylon. If you enjoyed this exploration, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Sleepy Dungeons for more journeys into lost civilizations. Until next time, May your night be calm and your dreams be filled with light.